Welcome everyone to another session of free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we are going to see questions from GS4. Two questions are going to be from Public Civil Services Values and Ethics in Public Administration. And one question will be from Current Affairs. Let us see the overview of those questions. The very first question is about how domain knowledge is very important, but apart from that, we also need innovativeness and creativity. We have seen foundational value. Now we have to also understand that innovation as well as creativity are certain other foundation as well as civil services values. The second question is about CSR, how it helps with respect to augments the business of a organization as well as helps with respect to sustainable growth of that industry. And the last is current affair based question. We are going to see how state funding of election is in the news and what are different kind of pros and cons with respect to the same. Let us start with the very first question. The very first question, let's read the question together. Beside domain knowledge, a public official need innovativeness and creativity of a higher order to resolve ethical dilemmas. Discuss with suitable example. In this kind of question, you have to load a lot of examples to back your argument. In the introduction, you can either define the domain knowledge, innovation and creativity. Over here, you can talk about how specific domain can help with respect to solving problem as well as how innovation and creativity is also required. You can start with an example as well as you can talk about Parmeshwaram Iyer and how he nudged people's behavior with respect to sanitation through Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So that is something in the introduction you can talk about. In the body, the heading 1, you can talk about how domain knowledge is also very important. So importance of domain knowledge in resolving ethical dilemmas. You can list down various importance like enhancing understanding through domain expertise, as in when a person who understands any specific set of domain, they can definitely solve ethical dilemmas through in-depth understanding of the situation so that they have extremely in-depth idea about the entire scenario. You can also talk about how specialization with respect to evolving government function can help, as in domain knowledge of how government functions can also help a civil servant resolve dilemmas. The third is quality improvement in decision making. Every subsequent decision which are made based on the backing of the domain knowledge can also augment further decision making quality. And the last is public trust and service delivery enhancement. Over here, we are making sure the entire public service delivery is enhanced and there is proper trust, as in the person who is having proper domain knowledge of that specific sector is trustworthy. So you can cite different examples for all the points above. You can talk about E. Sridharan, the metro man, how his domain knowledge with respect to the railway, the engineering helped him to face and fight a lot of ethical dilemmas. Next is K. Shivan, how he led the ISRO and a lot of different innovation and programs that were launched during his tenure. You can also talk about Amber Dubey, how through lateral entry he found himself in the Civil Aviation Ministry and through his domain knowledge he made sure there are certain initiatives which help respect to public service delivery. So that is something in the heading 1 you can add. Let's go to the heading 2 where the demand is how public official should also have innovation and creativity for resolving ethical dilemmas. Now innovation and creativity is also required apart from domain knowledge. You can talk about how out-of-box problem solving can help a civil servant to resolve ethical dilemma. Certain traditional methods, sometimes they can be limiting. For the same, out-of-box thinking is also required, which is part of innovation. Then reconciliation of divergent values. How through innovation, a civil servant can resolve ethical dilemmas where there are multiple conflicting values involved. You can talk about scenario where there are certain kind of pluralistic population. So over there, reconciliation of divergent values can be also solved through innovation and creativity. The third is reduction of bureaucratic red tapeism. We have seen that how bureaucracy because of the ritualism and the processes can become part of corruption as well as red tapeism. So through innovation like inculcation of technology can help with respect to resolving ethical dilemmas for public good. The next is enhancing transparency in e-governance. We have seen that how technology again have helped a lot. Apart from that, properly reporting information through public campaign and all, that also helps with respect to transparency and governance. And those are kind of innovative methods that civil servant must use to resolve ethical dilemmas. And the last is addressing cultural sensitivity through innovation. We have seen that how a civil servant, when they are placed in certain pockets where there are certain kind of norms, cultural methods, and etc. So at that place, a civil servant must engage certain kind of innovative tools apart from their domain experience and knowledge to ensure those ethical dilemmas are also resolved. Over here, you can also cite different examples. You can talk about Armstrong Pame, how he solved the issue of connectivity through out-of-box problem solving. The place where he was situated was facing certain kind of logistical challenges and fund crunch, and because of that he did crowdfunding and used those funds to solve the issue of connectivity. Then we have Faiz Mumtaz, how through innovation he installed library to ensure there is proper access and exposure for the community. Next is Dr. Sarvesh Bore. He inculcated massive online courses, as in through EdTech he ensured that people are able to access education. So there is element of access as well as equity over here. And we have Pulkit Singh, who understood cultural context and created certain innovative agricultural practices to ensure the local community is also having safe livelihood. So that is something you can add in this body aspect. So that is the part of question number 1's body. Let us see what in the conclusion you can talk about. In the conclusion, you can talk about learnings for civil services. You can talk about how in the book Range, David Epstein mentions that generalists, they triumph over specialists because of the fact that they are able to connect different things in innovative as well as in creative way. So that is something you can add over here. You can also talk about how apart from innovation, creativity, domain knowledge, which is aptitude, they must also have certain foundational values like empathy, tolerance, etc. So that is something you can also add over here in conclusion. So that is there for question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we structure our answer in writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about brief by defining those terms or give an example, or you can talk about how civil servant is jack of all trades and master of none, and how exactly they have to make sure they have diverse skills, domain knowledge as well as innovation and creativity. You can talk about the importance of domain knowledge. You can list down different arguments for the same and give examples to back those arguments. Next, in the heading 2, you talk about need of innovation and creativity in resolving ethical dilemmas. You list down all the possible significance of the same, give substantiation, and then give certain example to augment the weightage of your argument. And in the last, you talk about the importance for the civil services. So that is there for question number 1. Let us see question number 2. Let's read the question number 2 together. CSR is a vehicle on which the company can race past the profit highway towards sustainable growth. Elaborate. Now, CSR refers to corporate social responsibility. We do understand that organizations, they profit through society and market. At the same time, they also have responsibility towards the social development and make sure they also give back to the community so that the social justice is realized. So for the same, the question is demanding that CSR is a vehicle on which companies can race past the profit highway towards sustainable growth, as in they will not just achieve the profit, but they will also ensure this sustainable growth. Now we have to elaborate this thing. In the introduction, you can give the context, you can talk about how CSR is specifically a mandatory clause for Indian organization. You can talk about how it is a mandatory section under Companies Act 2013. You can talk about different criteria, how companies with net worth more than 500 crores, turnover greater than 1000 crores or net profit more than 5 crores have to mandatory contribute for CSR. You can talk about what kind of percentage they must contribute at least, as well as certain amendment that happened that gave certain kind of clause and significance. So that is there for the context you can add. You can also draw certain mind map to give the picture of CSR, that how it engages the society as in people, works for the environment as in the planet, and as well as augments the economy through profit, and all these values are achieved through CSR. So that is there for the introduction. You can write. Let's go towards the body and see the heading 1. The heading 1 talks about that CSR in realizing sustainable growth. As in the question says that it can raise past the profit towards sustainable growth. The very first point you can talk about is enhancing companies' reputation and public trust. We have seen certain organizations in India who have been part of CSR before the CSR Act came in place, and that has helped the company with respect to gaining the public trust and reputation. You can talk about how employee attrition and retention can also help, as in employee also feel that they are part of an organization who has a positive public image. Thus, their engagement with the organization is also in a positive way, leading to a positive work culture. The next is investor appeal. People can definitely would like to invest in those organizations who are listed on the security exchange and have that kind of positive impact for the society, as in they are contributing through CSR activities. Thus, investor appeal is also there, which will lead to sustainable growth of the company as well. Next is promoting environmental sustainability, as we have seen that CSR helps with respect to the society, the environment, as well as for the economy. So all three can encompass and help with respect to the environmental sustainability. And lastly, it helps with respect to improving social welfare. We have seen that how CSR funds, they are diverted towards education, towards health, as well as towards empowerment of the vulnerable community. And through all those activities, CSR can help with respect to social welfare. And you do understand that through that social welfare only, we realized quality human capital, and that human capital is very essential for any organization in future. So through that kind of circle and life cycle also, CSR is a very beneficial tool for organizations to achieve sustainable growth. So that is there for body heading 1. But we do understand there are certain kind of limitations with respect to CSR. The very first is operational cost increase. Companies anyhow do contribute to the economy. They help with respect to employment. They help with respect to the augmenting of the economy. Thus, they are anyhow contributing to the society. So, extra weight, extra push and pressure towards the company for CSR can increase their operational cost, and that can definitely impact their sustainable growth. The second is financial burden on stakeholders. The stakeholders we are talking about, as in the organization, the investors, and also the employees, as in the contribution which is going towards a CSR should be separated, as in should not be diverted back to the organization. So there is financial burden on stakeholder. The next is public scrutiny and expectation. Now those CSR activities will be under public scrutiny, and there will be certain kind of expectation from the organization. Now those organizations are not kind of specific domain expert of CSR. They are organizations with very specific agenda. When they do CSR, the funds which are diverted may not give that kind of return, and those kind of expectation can also hurt company's reputation. So that is there. And fourth is limited impact areas. We have seen that CSR has been narrow sector wise, as in region wise. Sector wise, as in the most of the fund is directed towards education and vocational skill and hunger and healthcare. That is something of an asymmetry in CSR funding. And regions, areas like rural development and sports are sidelined. And if we see region wise, we have seen that developed states like Maharashtra and Gujarat, they are the major recipients of CSR funds. So this shows asymmetry with respect to the impact sector as well as the region. So those are the limitations of CSR. Now let's see in the conclusion, how can we go ahead and ensure that the impact of CSR is rationalized as well as it is beneficial for everyone, the organization as well as for the society. Firstly, there should be ethical governance for better performance, as in we talked about how CSR, whenever it's done, the organization might not have the competence to divert those funds in a way. Therefore, there is need to have ethical governance for better performance of those CSR activities. Next is incorporating social goals, as in company can go parallel with incorporating social goals along with the CSR activities. Those social goals definitely help with respect to achieving social justice. The next is transparency for sustainable growth. Companies can ensure their fund which are diverted, they are diverted in a transparent manner so that any kind of responsibility is realized. So thus, transparency for sustainable development, social goals and ethical governance. So these are the kind of points that you can inculcate in the conclusion of your question number 2's answer. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we structure our answer for writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about CSR, what exactly it is, the act through which CSR is implemented, the criteria for which CSR is implemented, as well as you can draw the diagram to talk about its impact. Then you talk about how it helps with respect to realizing sustainable growth. You list down all the parameters and give certain examples to back those arguments. Next, you talk about the limitations of CSR to give a very holistic picture as well as help the evaluator understand that how CSR has certain loopholes, and in the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead what are the additional actions required to ensure that CSR is a powerful tool for sustainable growth of the organization as well as for the society. So that is there for question number 2. Let's see question number 3, which is a current affair question. Question number 3. Ensuring transparent and equitable state funding of elections in India is not just a financial investment, it is an investment in the democratic foundation of the nation. In light of the current discussion in the Supreme Court regarding transparency in election funding, examine the statement. In this question, we are going to deal with the recent current events that are happening where Supreme Court is demanding transparency with respect to election funding. There are certain headlines that you might have encountered, as in should election be state funded, election bond scheme, should it be eliminated and other alternative options should be brought in. And you can also talk about how there is certain news with respect to opaque financing of political parties, which is destroying our democracy. Now, these are the kind of current affairs you can inculcate in your introduction. You can also talk about different kind of committees, as in Indrajit Gupta Committee of 1988, which favored state funding, the Law Commission report of 1999, which favored the second ARC Reforms Commission, which had certain kind of reservation, and National Commission of Review and Working Committee, which disagreed with state funding. So these are the kind of committees you can also mention in the introduction. In the body, you have to talk about the transparency in election funding, as in the election bond, as well as other kind of fundings issue. So let us see the body aspect. In the heading 1, you can talk about the pros of state funding of election, as in that is the major theme of this question. You can talk about how it reduces corruption, as in we have seen in certain developed countries like Germany that state funding of the political party for election helps with respect to eliminating the corruption factor. Second, it also provides level playing field for every political party. In the Supreme Court judgment of Kanwar Lal Gupta versus Amarnath Chawla, we have seen that how Supreme Court explicitly says that because of asymmetry in funding through political party and through candidates, the level playing field is not realized, and people who have economic capital will definitely capture the political sphere. So that is something with state funding of election can be realized. The third is increased accountability, as in the state is providing those funds, thus everything is transparent, and thus through transparency accountability can also be realized. And last is encourages new entrants. We have seen that how political processes and parties, they have narrow candidates, as in new entrants are not incentivized, and because of state funding, new entrants can also participate in the process of democracy. So that is there for heading 1 of the body. Let's see heading 2, which is the cons of state funding of election. As we are going to talk about examine the entire situation, you can also talk about how there are certain limitations of state funding of election. The very first is burden on taxpayers. As we do understand that instead of the political parties or candidates bringing the fund, the state might be burdened with those kind of funding processes, and that fund which are directly captured from taxpayers might exactly go in the wrong direction, as in instead of going for the welfare, they are going for the election process. Second is potential for misuse. In past, we have seen that how the political party which is in power, they can misuse that kind of state funding mechanisms and allocate in asymmetrical manner. So there is possibility of misuse as well as there is possibility for corruption. Next is inadequate allocation. Now we do understand that we run a budget deficit, and because of that allocation might not go as per the need of the election campaign, and thus inadequate allocation can happen. And lastly, it is not a panacea. We have seen multiple loopholes as in misuse, corruption, asymmetry in allocation as per the requirement, as well as burden on the taxpayer. So it is not exactly solving the issue of transparency in election funding. So that is something you can write in the cons of state funding of election. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead, how other reforms are also necessary, such as consensus among political parties that there should be proper limit for political parties expenditure as well as candidates expenditure. Second is national election fund can also happen, through which proper state funding of election can happen, and that can happen through proper parliamentary and state legislative processes. Next is auditing political party accounts to ensure there is proper transparency of the funds that they are receiving. The next is expenditure and donation caps. We have seen that there are certain kind of caps, but despite that, we have seen there is huge asymmetry with respect to implementation. The next is leveraging technology for transparency, how use of blockchain can help with respect to the tracking of funding of political party. The sixth is adopting international best practices. We have seen example of Germany with respect to state funding of election. So those are the kind of best practices we can adopt from international community. And lastly is public awareness campaign. Over here, we are helping public to understand the political process, the election funding part, and thus they can be aware and raise voice and give vote according to the need of the hour, through as in they keep the ethical ideas at the center. So that is there for question number 3's conclusion. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about the recent current affairs, as well as you can talk about the different committees and their position with respect to state funding. Then you talk about the pros of state funding. You list down all the proof points and give examples for the same. Next, you can write about the cons of state funding. You list down all the arguments and give examples for the same. And lastly, you give a way forward kind of conclusion to conclude your answer. So that is there for question number 3. You are writing for answer writing program of Vajiram and Ravi, where in this month we are doing GS4 with 12 case studies. You can attempt those questions at vajiramis.com, and you will be also able to see the model answers in the description of this video on YouTube. If you want to work extensively for your answer writing practice, Vajiram and Ravi is launching mains intensive test series, which is a year-long test series with 38 tests, which is available offline and online. So do subscribe for the same and be mains ready. Thank you and keep writing.